This morning, our first speaker will be Michael Harrell. Michael is a BSRT prepared registered respiratory therapist and is currently the Director of Clinical Education for Passimure Incorporated. His past experience includes teaching, management, and clinical practice. Michael has served as president of the Florida Society for Respiratory Care and as a leader for the Rewrite Committee for the State of Florida's Respiratory Care Act. He has been published in various clinical journals and spoken on the national and state levels. Please help me welcome Michael Harrell as he speaks to us today on Don't Lose Sight of Your Mission. His talk is sponsored by Passimure Incorporated.
Good morning, everybody. I am trying to decide this morning whether being the first and the last speaker of the day is a good thing or not. Either way, I want to thank Colleen and the team for inviting me to speak for the Smoky Mountain Symposium. It's always an honor. I just miss actually being there in Pigeon Forge, Gatlinburg, and being with the whole group. I like hearing everybody's responses, and I like to get responses. We'll just have to go forward without that this morning. Again, you've already heard my name. You know who I am. And I can tell you that next Tuesday is my birthday. I'll be 68, so I'm as old as dirt. And I hope that gives me a little bit of reason for being able to do the presentation that I plan to do today. So what I am hoping this morning is that at the end of this talk, you will have a little clearer idea of vision and mission and how that relates to you. You'll be able to kind of refocus, if need be, your own vision and mission, and think about the barriers and just kind of be an inspiration. We need a little bit of inspiration here, I think, at this point. This has been kind of a difficult year, 2020, and a little bit of hope and inspiration, I think, is in order. We aren't going to be covering a whole bunch of slides this morning in this talk. It's a little too early in the morning to start with a bunch of detailed information on slides, so we're not going to do that. As Roger said yesterday, we don't want a death by PowerPoint, at least not in this talk. What I really am hoping to do is to begin with a few slides to help focus us on why I'm going to be talking about my life story this morning. And hopefully by clarifying why I'm presenting my life story, maybe that will help clarify and refocus and, oh, even if I could hope, a little bit of inspiration for all of you in these difficult times. So, what is a vision statement and what does it do? A vision statement describes what you want to achieve in the future. So it's a long-term view. The vision statement is something that is not going to be, what are you doing today? What are you doing tomorrow? It's a long-term view. And at this point, I would encourage you to think about, if you never have written your vision statement down, you might want to think about writing up your vision statement and your mission statement as we talk about this. It helps to focus. So the vision statement gives you a goal. It gives you, where do I want to be? And I'd like to be on a sunny beach about now, but it's a long-term view. It's a, where do I want to get to? So it's your objective, long-term. So it gives you, it helps you, and I think that it's really important to think about giving yourself a real mental picture of who you want to be and what you want to be doing 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, or even longer. I'll tell you that when I started respiratory therapy school in 1974, I don't know that I had so clear a vision, and I certainly did not foresee myself now at nearly 68 being where I am. But having a vision statement helped provide a, a just a goal, an overall objective. So aside from just giving you the picture, I think the purpose of giving you that picture of where you want to be, it serves as an inspiration. So why are you getting up this morning and going to work? You know, what is it you are trying to accomplish long term? And if we think about that when you get up in the morning and when you go to work, that will be helpful. Particularly helpful when you think about getting up and going to work and facing 6 ventilator COVID patients, some of whom may die. It's a difficult period of time. So being able to maintain your vision could really be helpful. And having your vision and having that inspiration, I think, is something that's really important for each one of us. So that's what the vision statement is and kind of what you hope to accomplish with a vision statement. And with just having a vision for your life and your purpose, and that can be in your work, in your spiritual life, in your just personal lives day to day. But that vision statement does what we just talked about. Now, what is the mission statement? So it describes what you want right now and how is it going to help you achieve your long-term vision or aspirations. So you have to have the vision statement first because you've got to know where you want to get to before you can work out the map as to how are you going to get there. It's more concerned with the future, with the vision, with your current state. It is not so concerned with the future, except that it has to be consistent with getting to your future goal. So there's a few questions that you want to think about as you think about your day-to-day mission statements and what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. It's what am I doing? What do I do? What specifically do I do right now? And how does it apply to where I'm going? How do I do it? How do you achieve what you're doing today, this very day? And if you think about that in terms of your vision statement and how your current place applies to that, that's going to be really helpful on a day-to-day basis. Who do I do it for? That can really matter a great deal. If you do it for somebody you really enjoy working for, and that really works with your mission statement and with your vision, that's really good. If it doesn't, maybe you should think about changing your current position because it's not helping you achieve your ultimate vision. What makes me different? Why am I any different from anybody else? That really has a big impact on your achieving your ultimate vision, your ultimate goal. And what is the benefit? How does it benefit me personally? How does it fit in with my overall plan? And how does it benefit others? And probably the how does it benefit others is the most important part of this whole concept. Hopefully, your vision statement is based on an overall motive of helping others. And I think most respiratory therapists are motivated by that goal of helping others, or else you would have chosen to be a carpenter or a drywaller or a banker or something of that sort. You would have chosen a different profession. So it's really important to think of every day of your life as part of your journey. There's a there's a song that I learned when I was singing in a choir that was called "The Journey Is Our Home," which really was not comfortable for me because I'm the type who likes to get things done. I want to have an objective and I want it done and that's it. The concept that life is a journey and perhaps it will always be a journey is a little uncomfortable for me. But we need to remember that and need to remember where are we in our journey and how does that fit in with our ultimate goal and our ultimate vision. So we need to look at the map. And I think some of you probably remember that there are paper maps, right? You can look on a paper map and kind of find where you are on that paper map and see where your next turn is. That's kind of gone by the wayside for the most part with GPS, but it even applies to a GPS. But that's an important concept. So the whole idea of mission is really, really important. And I just want to cover here just briefly a few of the barriers that could get in the way. And remember, we are not looking at this just as individual slides. This is all with the purpose of preparing you for the story that I'm going to tell in just a few minutes. So think about these things and think about them as I talk about my story. So the first and most important barrier to getting achieving your vision is going to be not having one, right? If you don't have a vision, you're not going to achieve it. If you don't have a goal, you're not going to get there. So if you haven't sat down and thought about where you're headed, you're not going to get there. So there's another significant barrier. You may think, well, what is that? Perfection versus gratitude. Well, we need to remember that every day may not be perfect. Every day is unlikely to be perfect. And the graphic on this slide is a slide of the gymnast who worked really hard and achieved the silver medal in the Olympics. And look at her face. She's not happy. But really, this is the whole world she competed against. She got the silver medal. Isn't that a fabulous achievement? And why not celebrate that achievement rather than being sorry that you didn't get the gold medal? We're not always going to achieve every single thing we try for. We're not always going to be perfect. Let's celebrate what we do achieve. Let's celebrate that we made it through a day. And I'm sure you can appreciate that now, particularly those of you who are working in acute care or in environments where you're working with COVID patients. You're just appreciative that you were able to work through that day. And you may have been a significant part of somebody's life who has COVID. Failure is another barrier, or can be another barrier. Does failure have to be another barrier? It doesn't have to be. Failure can be a stepping stone if we let it be a stepping stone. We're going to fail. I failed, and I know each one of you has failed at something at some point. How we respond to that failure and whether we treat it as a learning experience or not is important. Failures can be very, very painful. They can be hard to work through. But how we respond to that, keeping our vision in mind, looking at our map, can make a great deal of difference in how we respond to each individual failure that we go through and recognize in our lives. Now, have you ever heard the song, I Want It All and I Want It Now? I think it may have been Queen who did that song. I have to be honest, I heard that for the very first time and was just horrified at that song. What an attitude. I want it all and I want it now. That's not a useful way, first of all, to achieve your vision. You're not going to get there by expecting it to come right now. Patience is a virtue. One small step at a time, every day at a time, sometimes one step backwards, to one step forward, two step backwards. Sometimes it's like that. You can't have everything right now. Don't be discouraged by the fact that you're not going to achieve everything all at once. Take every little success, every little day, and make it meaningful to you. It's important. So, procrastination. You know, one of the things I really hate doing, and Colleen, you'll have to forgive me for this, I really hate preparing a PowerPoint presentation. I really hate putting together the outline. It takes me monumental effort to just get it started. I don't find that getting started to be easy. It's kind of like Dr. Seifer said yesterday, when you start that wheel turning, the first few turns are really difficult to get them moving. Once they get going, though, they go better. I don't know if any of you have ever read the book, The Lord of the Rings. There's a great quote that has stuck in my mind from it all along, ever since I first read it. And that was Sam Gamgee, if you know the book. He's Frodo's servant, helper, companion through the whole journey. And they are having to leave a country that they don't want to leave, that's beautiful. And Sam is talking to Frodo, telling him that he feels like we got to get going because, as his dad, the gaffer, says, it's the job that never gets started that takes the longest to finish. So getting going is important. Distractions. Well, we know a lot of distracted drivers, and in this case, goodness, you're going to be distracted by your cell phone in this environment? Heaven's sakes. We can get distracted. There's a lot of distractions that get thrown at us throughout our whole lives. Think about distractions now. Gracious sakes, we got tons of distractions thrown at us. It's a difficult time. The 2020 has been a difficult time. Not only do we have COVID and all its mess, all of our crazy politics and social issues are all getting thrown in. Everything could be very distracting and could get our attention drawn off. But we need to keep that vision in mind. Inconsistency is a difficult concept because we're all inconsistent at times, I think. I know I can be inconsistent. But that's the importance of having that vision, sitting down and thinking about your vision, writing it down, and if you need to, sit down and look at it every now and then. Compare where you are and where you're going, and how consistent can that help you be today as you do your work and as you think about what you're doing in your life today, and why you're sitting here looking at your computer screen, listening to me talk. How does that apply to your vision? And being consistent is really an essential part of achieving your ultimate vision. So that's the end of the slides. No more slides. I'm not going to share with you slides anymore. So we're going to take down the slides, and the only thing you'll have to look at will be me. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but let's talk about my story. And again, think about how that really applies to what we just talked about. So I was born in Chicago in 1952. I was born in the South Side in the southern suburbs of Chicago. at about 3 years old, my mother figured out that there was something wrong with my eyes. And I still don't know, did she notice that because they were looking different? Did she notice it because I was complaining of headaches and my eyes hurt at 3? What I do know is that it resulted in my being carted off to the pediatrician and then off to an eye specialist, who then discovered that I had congenital glaucoma. So it's a condition that you have from birth. Congenital means that, so that's obvious. But it's similar to the glaucoma that people get as they get older. The pressure in the eyes is not regulated. The pressure in my eyes had built up enough so that the vision in my right eye had been seriously damaged. It puts pressure on the optic nerve, and so it kind of destroys the vision gradually, peripherally, gradually inwards. So it really ruined my right eye more. My left eye was not in too bad a condition. So what did that mean? That means I started a whole series of surgeries. Fortunately, the fellow who was my doctor was Dr. Kronfeld. He was a research doctor, and he had developed a lot of the procedures and treatments for congenital glaucoma. So I started on a whole series of surgeries. And the first surgery, I'm not sure that I remember, but I do remember the second surgery. I remember when the nurse patted that gurney and said, "Okay, slide over here, honey," and patted the gurney. And I did not want to do it. Instead of sliding over, I screamed and hollered. I was not about to get in that gurney because I knew where it was going, and I didn't want to go there. So I had a bunch of surgeries throughout my childhood. It had some definite impacts on my life growing up. I still could see. I still could do most things that I needed to do by then. My left eye was not too bad. My right eye, though, was pretty bad. So what that really meant was that I had very bad depth perception. So I couldn't see how far things were away. Didn't do very well trying to see things on the board in school. Now, all of you remember the old blackboards, right? A lot of you are probably not even old enough to remember what a blackboard is. The teacher used to write on it with chalk, and you had to read it to learn. So I was in second grade in Chicago, and I remember the teacher's name still was Mrs. Lyons. And I was sitting on the front row, and I raised my hand and said, "I can't see the board." And her answer to me was, "Well, what do you want? You're on the front row. You want me to hang you from the ceiling?" That was a pretty strong lesson to me, that something was wrong with me. The fact that I couldn't see was my problem, and it was something wrong with me, and that I had better try to hide it as much as I could. That was a pretty significant lesson. I learned that lesson real well. Growing up, I was lousy at sports. I didn't play baseball well. I can remember being bashed in the nose with the baseball because, sure, I could see the ball, but I had no idea how far it was away from me, so I could swing the bat after it already hit me in the face. That didn't help me when it came to things like PE in school. I know what it was like to be in school, and we go to PE class, and everybody is selecting a team to go on the baseball team. And they selected captains, and then the captains got to select the team. Well, guess who was always the last one? Guess who always got to be assigned to the team because nobody wanted him? What does that teach an individual about personal value? So that was hard. That was a hard lesson to learn. When it came to be in the coming up to 18, what do most people do, especially guys who are going to be real guys? they get a driver's license, right? Well, unfortunately, I was right on the edge of being able to get a driver's license or not. So I was never able to get a driver's license. So my mode of transportation was my feet or the bicycles, which worked fine for me. But again, that wasn't a real good thing for me when it comes to being popular or fitting in with the other kids, with the other people your age, and fitting into your culture and your society. So these are all lessons that I'm learning. So I graduated from high school, had to decide what I was going to do as a profession, and tossed around. I worked for a year in a hospital as an orderly in surgery. We now have technicians, but I remember being an orderly in surgery. And by the way, I never found wearing a mask as an orderly in surgery too difficult. I never died. It wasn't painful. So I'm not sure what the big deal is about putting a mask on. But anyway, um, so I did that. And then in that time frame, I also became a Christian, which made a difference for me. So I went away to college and still didn't know what I wanted to do. Ultimately, just before I got married, I decided that I wanted to change from theology to being a respiratory therapist. And I will say here, first of all, that I personally have very strong confidence in the leadership of God Himself. So I'll just make that as a statement so you understand a little bit more about what goes on in my story. Anyway, my wife and I, Sharon, got married, and I went up to Columbia Union College outside of Washington, D.C., which is now Washington Adventist University. And I started in respiratory therapy school in 1974. I finished my associate's degree in 1976. I then went away and worked in an outpatient clinic in West Virginia for about a year and a half, 2 years. Took my registry then, of course, took the written, took the oral exams. Oh, that was an awful experience. Took the oral exams, passed them both the first time, and I was so grateful. They were not pleasant. I didn't want to repeat that ever again. So I did that. And the job in West Virginia did not turn out so well. I worked at an outpatient clinic. It was difficult. There was a lot of political things that went on, and it became apparent to me that I needed to make a change. And I started to think about, what do I really want to do with my life? And I think teaching came up as a thing I really wanted to accomplish. I really wanted to teach ultimately. So I decided to go back to CUC and finish my BS degree in respiratory therapy, which I did. I finished that degree, worked at the hospital, worked in the intensive care units. I loved working in the intensive care units with the vent patients. I loved making those decisions. I loved that kind of constant having to think and move and do what you're doing and all of those things. It was great work. I loved it. Once I graduated, I did not want to live in Washington, D.C., so my wife and I ultimately moved down to Port Charlotte, Florida, and I took a job in Punta Gorda, Florida, and worked at a hospital down there. It's important to know that the Peace River is in between Port Charlotte and Punta Gorda. The Peace River is about a mile wide, and there's a bridge between them, and it's one of these up and over bridges. So between where I lived and where I worked, there was a bridge, and I liked to ride my bicycle back and forth to work. So we moved to Port Charlotte. I started work, going back and forth, sometimes got a ride, but often rode my bike in and out to work. In at 7, the shift was 7 to 3. That was before the 12-hour shift days. I did that, been there for 6 weeks, and it was Mother's Day of 1980. And it was Mother's Day. We'd only lived there for 6 weeks, so I wanted to get a gift for my wife. I was going to stop by Kmart on the way home. I pedaled across the bridge, was flying down the south side of the north side of the bridge, which is the downhill side. And that's the last thing I remember until I woke up And it was several days later before I even began to wake up. And I vaguely remember hearing someone who I later learned was my eye surgeon trying to get me to wake up and trying to tell me what had happened. All I knew at that point was that I hurt from my head to my toes and I couldn't see a thing. I went in and out of consciousness for quite some time, for probably a week and a half or so. But I found out that what had happened, coming off of that bridge, it would put me into the oncoming traffic on a busy divided 4-lane kind of divided road. And I got off of that in about half a block and would turn left onto an angled street that had a yield. I did that day, apparently, and an 18-year-old kid in his dad's squareback Volkswagen station wagon came speeding out, must have been looking backwards, and hit my bike, and I went up in the air and landed on the hood of his car and hit my head into the windshield. I smashed his windshield to bits. He came out into the road, stopped, and I slid off and wound up in a heap on the pavement. Now, that's a description of people who saw it. I would have no clue. I don't remember a thing about the accident, and I'm glad because it probably hurt. So I was taken off to the hospital, was eventually transferred down to Fort Myers with a brain injury, was in the hospital for 13 weeks. The result was blindness because I lost my good eye. It's now a prosthesis. What vision I had in my right eye has only deteriorated over time, and all I see is a little bit of light and dark. And during those 13 weeks in the hospital, I had a lot of time to think about what on earth was I going to do as a blind respiratory therapist. I had a new little daughter who was 13 months old. How was I going to take care of them, and what was I going to do? This was a pretty formidable thing for me to think about. Pretty significant barrier, I think, to my goals. In the end, and I have to make the story as short as I can here, a discharge from the hospital, by the way, no discharge planning at all back in 1980, none whatever. I was just tossed out of the hospital and told, by the way, make sure you pay your bill. And we had to get a lawyer to take care of that. But I then went back home and was scared to death as to what on earth was I going to do. The last thing in the world I wanted was to be put on disability and sit around and soak up disability the rest of my life. That was not my vision. I did not like that. Fortunately, as I said before, God had plans for me that I didn't know about. He knew about the vision, and he helped with that for me. Ultimately, the boss who had hired me decided that I had too much to offer with a BS degree and with all that I had to offer just to let it go. So in the end, we found, and it took a lot of search because back then there was not a lot of resources, we found some tools for me to actually go back to work. So what did I do going back to work? And at this point, I didn't even use a white cane, by the way. It took me a while to recognize what my real situation was visually. It takes a while for that stuff to sink in. Anyway, so what I did was, first of all, used a big TV system that would magnify letters about that big. It would get them about as big as you could, and I could slowly read through some things. And we worked together with a company. We had a Godart pulmonary function testing unit with a computer system attached to it. They weren't as nicely computerized as they are now. The company that we worked with helped create a voice synthesizer that was attached to the computer So I could do pulmonary function tests by ear. That was pretty phenomenal to me. It was exciting to me to be able to get back into my profession and to really do something that really mattered. And by the way, I went back and compared my pulmonary function tests when we had records of people who had previous pulmonary function tests, and we did some control studies, and mine were every bit as accurate and every bit as consistent. So I was really very excited about that. So I did the continuing education and pulmonary functions for a few years, or even a year. Then the person who was the director left, and I was put in as interim director of the respiratory therapy department. Then I became the director of the respiratory therapy department. We then started doing intra-aortic balloon pumping. I helped educate the staff. We became the therapists who took care of the intra-aortic balloon pump. We opened a cath lab. I was in charge of the whole cardiopulmonary department for a while. We then started cardiac surgery. We educated the respiratory therapists how to deal with all this post-op care and the care of the balloon pump patients. And I was manager of that department in different types of capacities and different configurations for 25 years. During that time, I was president of the Florida Society twice. I was on the committee to rewrite the Respiratory Care Practice Act for the state of Florida. I was able to work with the state of Florida to make Medicaid children's services payable for respiratory therapists. That means as a respiratory therapist in Florida, you can actually deliver services to Medicaid children and actually be paid for it. And I know there were businesses started doing just that, and I was very proud of that achievement. I did that for 25 years. I then decided it was time to get out of management. Management was becoming more and more difficult, and I know many of you will appreciate that. Our hospital was an Adventist hospital and then was sold to a for-profit corporation, which totally changed the character and objectives of the company. So I started thinking, through doing some work with the Passy-Muir valve and doing so, we did a process on airway care management and developed a whole airway care process that was highlighted by JCHO. In our survey, we did the presentation on our whole focus group. It was written up in the quality journal for the JCHO. And through that relationship, I became a consultant with Passy-Muir and then ultimately became full-time with Passy-Muir. Was a director of clinical education respiratory for Passy-Muir for 15 years. I'm now doing part-time work for them because I'm getting a little older and I can do a little bit more what I want. But I've been doing that now for, well, going on 16 years. Done a lot of traveling, a lot of teaching, a lot of being able to work directly one-on-one with respiratory therapists in their facilities. I love going to facilities and teaching. You saw a picture when we just were ending the slideshow presentation. That was me doing one of our educational presentations for a hospital. And I loved that teaching. So in the end, I got to fulfill my vision of getting into teaching, which is really what I do now. It was a wonderful thing for me to be able to see my vision really fulfilled. And now that I'm 68 and I can look back at my life and I can see how that all worked, and I truly believe, first of all, that God had an ultimate plan for me. But that vision has been achieved, and I'm really just really grateful for that. I think that it's just about time for me to end the presentation. I'm happy to take any questions if there's any questions you could have. And I've appreciated being able to talk to you. And I hope that it was some meaning to some of you, and I hope it'll be a benefit to you. And thank you for listening to me.
Hey, Mike, that was great. We surely appreciate you this morning. Right now, I don't have any questions, but I do want to share um, one of the comments from your audience. And you have always been a good teacher leader. You always, oh, I just lost it because there were so many comments. Good. You always wanted and were meant to be. Thank you, Mike, for your inspiration. So good to see you this year. Always look for you at the seminar. God's plan is always perfect. Another comment was such an inspiration to me. Thank you for sharing your story. It took courage to do what you did. So, and now I do have maybe one or two questions. Let me see what they are. Nope, just phenomenal speaker. Thank you, Mike. Very inspiring. Wow, you are quite the hit this morning.
Well, that's good. I'm glad if it could be of meaning to someone. I think that's kind of what the purpose is. And especially now, it's such a difficult year. It's been such a challenging year.
It has been. Thank you, Mike, and everybody hang on because he's going to join us again later on today. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thank you.